Hey gamers, welcome to another episode of Bonus XP. Today we are talking about Fire Emblem 6 and Fire Emblem 7, and that's like Binding Blade and Blazing Sword, right? The names that never made it to the West.
I think it's
Is that
Blazing
correct?
Blade now.
Blazing Blade, okay.
I was going to say, I know it was one, and then it changed in how the fandom referred to it.
Yeah, we used to have Sword of Seals for FE6 too, and now it's Binding Blade.
Yeah, that's still what my patch says because I have not updated it.
And if you notice, we got Mekkah and Lizard back again, which is awesome. Good having you have a little break from Bopper, which is nice. I think he was getting run a little ragged. Finally got to escape his the closet I keep him in. So for a lot of us, this was the very first Fire Emblem. Especially if you are not in Japan, and like definitely for me, this was the first one I picked up at launch. And I remember being in school, and we'd have like the high school morning news on TV, and there would be like Fire Emblem commercials, and I'd be like, that I want to play that. And it would just be like a very quick 10-second commercial of the game. And it was really cool to see something like that where, you know, in the West being a brand new IP and being so interested in a tactics RPG. But like, when did you guys first hit 7?
I have one quick question. Was that the Dorcas one that you saw?
The Dorcas commercial?
Yeah.
All I remember... Sometimes I mix it up with the Final Fantasy Tactics Advance commercial because they came out so close to each other. I just remember seeing the Peg Knight and thinking like that was one of the coolest things I've ever seen. Which I mean, like high school brain. So
I don't remember
like,
seeing ads.
You remember
for Fire
Pence
Emblem.
like roasting a wyvern?
What was that?
Pence roasting a wyvern? Was that part of it?
No, I don't think so.
Okay, that's
Maybe we
because
had
that's a
different
Dorcas
commercials. Okay. I'll have to look that up after.
You should. It's very funny.
Yeah, no, I got introduced to Fire Emblem by someone who told me I was playing too much Pokemon and need to play something else, and here we are.
Oof.
Yeah.
And he showed me FE7 first, and that kind of stuck with me for the rest of my life.
I got into it when I was a kid, the year it came out. I was pretty young, and I was pretty much buying games off, like, you know, my parents would occasionally let me buy a game, and I would just get it off the box art, pretty much.
Right.
So that's how I got Fire Emblem. I thought the box art was really cool.
I think for a release that is a prequel, that was an awfully bold move, don't you guys think? Like, it's strange to think that 6 wasn't the first release. Why do you think like we didn't get 6?
Oof, I don't know. They probably thought it was too hard for us. I don't know. Like,
Yeah.
I wasn't around for the release window. I think I should contextualize this. I got into FE7, I think, a little while before Radiant Dawn came out. So I can't tell you anything about the release window for FE7.
Which is that's not too far, because I feel like this was 2003 or 2004 for 7, and then Radiant Dawn might have been like 2008. So I mean, like, there's not a huge gap there.
I guess not. All I know is that they wanted to capitalize off of Roy's popularity in Smash, and so they didn't release the game with Roy in it. I'm still puzzled.
It makes no sense. It literally makes, and then you're like, balls get cupped at the end of 7 when you finally do get to see Roy, right? Like, it's ridiculous. Yeah, I always thought that it was strange, like, thinking about it afterward and like anticipating when you do beat 7 and you see Roy, and you're like, okay, I can't wait for the sequel now where I get to play as him, right? And like, then Sacred Stones come out and you're like,
skeleton.png.
Yeah, literally.
It is.
So you think? Oh, go ahead.
It is pretty surprising that 6 hasn't been remade yet. I always thought that would be one of the sooner ones that they would remake because people like Roy, but I guess not.
Well, they're kind of going in order, right? They started with 1, then they did 3, then they did 2, kind of in order.
Yeah.
That's
Well, I
where
guess
we
it
are
makes
now.
sense to go out of order for 1 and 3 since they're sequels.
Yeah, it would be a very obvious move to remake 6 at some points. It's just a
Yeah.
matter of do they do it before or after
The
Jupiter.
fabled FE4 remake.
Yeah, that one that's definitely coming out next Nintendo Direct for
Next
sure.
Direct.
Tangent, how does that feel every time Nintendo Direct comes out and like everybody's hyping it up and then just there's nothing, like it's just a tumbleweed?
I think people need to not let themselves get too invested in it. Like, I get excited, when there's a new Direct. I'm like, maybe there'll be a new Fire Emblem, but I don't know. You can't let it ruin your day if there's not.
2 Directs ago, I was like, oh, maybe it'll happen. There's some random rumors that you could, with some a nice portion of hopium, you could connect it to FE4. So let's hope for it. And then the previous one, like the last one we just got, I was like, there's just gonna be no way. So like, I'm not even gonna host it on my own channel when I'm watching it with friends. Like, it's just not happening this time, and that makes it a lot more relieving to watch. I think just thinking there will be nothing, but you never know. Sometimes they just drop a Fire Emblem thing first thing in a Direct, like with 3 hopes, and it's like, what the fuck.
And who knows too? Like I feel like it was one of you two who said that Engage was on the shelf for a while before it actually came out, right? Like I think that was our first episode together.
I think that's been confirmed. I know that was in the leak.
Yeah.
So maybe it's the case where like when we heard that, I think it was like a year and a half ago at this point, that Path of Radiance was being remade. Like maybe it's already done and it's just sitting on a shelf somewhere.
Yeah, who knows?
And just like they're just waiting for the best time.
I highly doubt everything.
Yeah, you just never know at this point. But back to 6 and 7. Would this still be your go-to if someone was brand new to the series? If you're like, hey, this is where you want to start. It's kind of like Final Fantasy VI situation where I feel like a lot of people, whenever they're like, what's one of the best ones to recommend, they're always like 6 or 9. And I feel like that's how it works out here, where it's like 7 or Path of Radiance, if you can get your hand on it, are probably the best 2 to start with. But what do you guys think? Accessibility aside.
Oh, well, accessibility is like my main point. But yeah, I'll give someone 7, 8, or 9 any day for a starting game.
Yeah, usually I recommend 8, Awakening, or 7, depending on the person.
Well, and why do you think that is?
It's easy. It's an easy game to start with. It has a massive tutorial.
Yeah.
It has everything you need for a beginner game. I mean, I made a whole video about what's the best game to start with, and I think FE7 just ticks all the boxes that I had there. It's accessible, and not in the sense that like you can get the game easily, because I'm pretty sure that's not true if we're counting legal means only, right?
I mean, it's for sale on Etsy.
Oh yeah, I guess it is. I guess it is always Etsy.
That's legal.
I mean, so is
right?
Path of Radiance in a way, isn't it? It's just a very simple game that has a lot of core mechanics that Fire Emblem has throughout pretty much the entire series. You could argue some things have changed, but it's still grid-based combat at its most pure form in a lot of ways. It just works.
I actually don't find it too hard going back to these 2 to play, because I feel like they have a lot of just like the base strats that you can use, which I feel like are really helpful, like rescuing. When you compare it to something like Shadow Dragon, where like there's just nothing, you're like, it's just your units are pretty much there. There's not much of a tactical slant to the game. So I know, like, of course 7 and 6 don't have the most interesting mechanics and whatnot, but at least there's still something there, right?
Yeah, you could argue like Shadow Dragon is maybe more pure, even when it's just move your units here and they'll stay there. I felt like 7 did a pretty poor job of explaining rescuing, which was kind of annoying, but at the same time, you don't need rescuing to enjoy Fire Emblem. The most important thing is to get you hooked, and I guess what 7 has that very few other games have is just the cool Lin animations at the start of it. Like, that sells copies by itself, I think.
Yeah. People really like the Lin part of the game the first time they play, I find. If it's the first game they play. If it's like the 4th game, usually they don't like it.
I mean, when Engage came out, Lin was one of the characters I was most looking forward to for that reason. And I think, like, using the term unit feel, like, she definitely is one of the characters where, not, again, we don't always play Fire Emblem for story and whatnot, but, like, the game makes you care for her, and they do a really good job of it. I mean, some of the lines are, like, going back and rereading them now from an adult lens, the lines are terrible. But, like, when you were a kid, like, it's not so bad. You don't pay as much attention. You can forgive. Don't they spell a couple of the the countries like completely wrong too in the game.
Possibly. FE7, and this goes for a lot of parts of FE7, it's very good when you're playing it for the first time, especially if it's your first time you're playing something of this genre, and like both for strategy and for this type of story, like medieval fantasy kind of stuff, I think, because you have no frame of reference, nothing to compare it to. And it doesn't mean it's bad, but in a lot of ways, the more critically you look at FE7, the more you'll notice its flaws, which goes for everything, but I think for FE7 it goes extra strongly. So it's not clinical, it's just very exciting to play. You just get involved, and as long as you don't think about it too hard, it works really, really well. But if you're going to spell check, for example, then yeah, there's some problems there.
There are a few issues there.
Yeah.
All right, let's okay, Lizard.
Oh no, go ahead. You're fine.
I was gonna say, like, let's obviously I want to bounce back and forth because, you know, these games, it's so strange that we have two games that are so closely related, but at the same time, because we never got one release, it almost feels like they're worlds apart. Let's spend some time on 6-2, because it's a completely different beast, right? Like, I feel like it is a strange one for me to play.
It is. It's very clearly the first game for the Game Boy Advance when it comes to Fire Emblem. They're like really reinventing themselves. It's the first game after they parted ways with Kaga. And I find that the FE6 story, compared to FE7, it's more clinical. It's like a retreating of Marth's story almost. It's a less personal conflict compared to FE7. It's less exciting in a lot of ways. It has a couple moments that I find powerful and impactful, but for the most part, it's pretty bland. That's probably also because there's no facial expressions like in 7, so everyone's just kind of not blinking, staring at each other, or looking like, you know, the most straight-faced emoji you can think of all the time. And
it doesn't have any of like the anime, like the comic-y manga scenes either.
Yeah,
It's
very straightforward, and the villains mostly just talk to the other villains, and Roy just talks to Guinevere and Merlinus, who people apparently don't like, and that's pretty much it. Whereas FE7, it has a ton of moments that everyone remembers. It's a lot more flashy, like I said. So yeah, it's a very different beast, even though these games are probably the most alike games in the series.
I did think it was interesting that, like, obviously this was the first game after Kaga and was intended to be kind of a new direction for the series, that it retreads so much ground from FE1. And I would argue plot-wise does some things less well. Like, I do feel like it's really missing, you have Lilina, but I feel like Lilina doesn't have the same, like, narrative presence as Sita, who's one of, like, the more interesting characters at FE1. So it was missing that for me.
Yeah,
Do you think that's because of availability?
Why is that?
Or yeah?
I don't know. I've been playing FE6 again this week, like, for this. And I've played a ton of Arcanea recently, and I feel like, does Sita just have more dialogue? Or maybe I'm conflating, like, Shadow Dragon Sita with FE1 Sita.
So I have a dumb memory for this kind of stuff, so I'm going to recite what I remember about both of these, right? So Lina is in her joining chapter, and I guess she's in the prologue or chapter 1, where she's like, her castle's getting assaulted, and she's with Eliwood, right?
Yeah.
And then her joining chapter, and then she recruits Gonzalez and Garrett. And I think that's basically it.
Whereas
and then
for Sita,
and she's in
chapter
season
1,
7, I guess.
She's in chapter 1, she's in the end game, and she recruits like a bajillion different characters. So maybe it's just the amount of recruitment dialogue she has, even.
Yeah, but that's like, you say bazillion. I remember like 3. Roger, Castor, and Lawrence.
I think, let me check how many it is.
I think that's it. So I think she recruits
Is
one
it
more
really
character.
only
And I
3?
can't imagine that alone. I can't imagine it's Lawrence solely who's responsible for your memory of this.
No,
because Lawrence
I'm
is very
trying to think.
responsible for anyone's
okay,
memory.
okay. It is more than 3. It's also Navarre, Jake. So it's 5. So it's like a little more, but not that much more.
And I guess like that's probably spread out a lot more too, so you kind of see her as like a more meaningful unit in that way, where, you know, Lilina just kind of seems like someone you rescue who comes in the most based, you know, where, you know, it is more fun to have this unit who has like a ton of viability because she's a flyer, and then B, where like you're constantly using because of the number of people that you can recruit across the game versus like someone who come in not like the middle of the game, but a little bit later.
I guess. I mean, I want to raise a counterpoint for Lena. She is talking for a bit for the next chapter as well, for the Guidance chapter where you get to Randall, and she has supports, whereas Sita doesn't. Although Sita has
True.
FE12 supports, I guess. So I don't know. I feel like that distinction is made a lot, but I don't feel like it's rooted in the amount of text we have for both characters.
You actually brought up something I want to bring up too, and that's the extra chapters and the true ending route in FE6. As someone who is constantly streaming Iron Man's like both of you, how does this affect your playthrough? Because I feel like this is probably the most rigid game in terms of getting like a true ending. Is that right?
Yeah, the only time I have streamed an FE6 Iron Man, I got the good ending. So, and also,
okay.
I only said this because you asked me. All right, I did not mean to brag, but like, and also the first time I played FE6, I just looked up everything. So those are the only two opportunities I had, I think, to miss out is my first playthrough and an Iron Man where I cannot reset. And every other playthrough I've done where I am allowing myself to reset, I reset to get the good ending. So for me, this is how the game works. You get the good ending.
Right.
So not much to say.
I mean, because if it's your first time playing it through, like you want to see it, and I completely agree with that. But like, okay, so maybe how do you feel about such a rigid true ending experience in general? Like, do you think that this is actually cool because it makes you play differently and it makes the game more exciting, or do you feel like no, this is way too much of a steep curve?
Not a big fan of it. Not a big fan of like, oh, your mage with 4 blaze died. Well, there goes 3 chapters of your life.
Yeah, it does feel like a lot of requirements.
And they're super ambiguous too. Like, it's not like it's one of those things where like, imagine playing something like Fates and like the only way to get Revelation chapter was to somehow keep the main siblings alive, but like you also had the opportunity to kill them. I feel like every time you see that stone light up when you get one of your siblings and their weapon, like that there's something going on there. But 6 doesn't really do anything like that. So losing a character that could get you an next chapter, losing a character that has one of the weapons on them could make you just completely lose the true ending. It seems like it's a lot.
Yeah, I think the main culprit of losing things like this is someone like Sue or something. Like the fact that if you miss Sue in chapter 6 means you cannot get Sin, and then you're just never getting the good ending if you go to Sakara route, and you just miss both nomads for missing one recruitable character in a cell somewhere, or forgetting to recruit Zeus, who's all the way in a corner up in chapter 16 somewhere, also misses you the good ending no matter what happens. So it can go wrong very, very easily, and I'm not a super big fan of that.
And you said this was the first game without Kaga, is that right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's interesting to hear that too, because that just feels like they try to kind of imitate a Kaga style, but flubbed.
Yeah, I don't know. There's that weird rumor about FE5 where it was made the way it was because Kaga wanted to sell guidebooks, which is completely wrong. That was a mistranslation by someone. I don't know if that was really... I feel like the way Kaga did it was he would hide little bits of extra content that were easily missable but not super consequential. Whereas, I don't know, when does Kaga ever hide a big portion of the game behind something like that? I can't really think of anything like it.
I guess there's like some noteworthy missables in like Thracia guidance.
Yeah, I would say that would.
But not you don't like miss the ending of the game.
Yeah,
right.
You miss like a powerful weapon or a powerful character, but
close. I guess the closest would actually be the star shards in FE3.
Yes. Oh yeah, they were not an FE12 thing too. They were in FE3 as well. Yeah, I did actually miss. I want either FE3 or FE12. I think I missed a shard once that was like in a corner of a map somewhere.
Yep, I missed exactly one on my first playthrough.
That does suck, yeah. That does suck. That's a fair point, actually. So I guess they tried to do that, which makes sense. FE6 is in a lot of ways like FE3.
I think the one that bothers me about FE6 is actually just the not being able to break the weapons. Because most of the Gaidem requirements are honestly not terribly unreasonable. Like they're usually like, okay, 20 turns, 25 turns, 30 turns.
Yeah, the turns are fine. They're very generous.
And I think most people, maybe not most people, I don't know. I think a lot of people reset when units die anyway. So you're fairly likely to just get the guidance requirements, I think. But then, like, I don't know, don't people want to use the exciting weapons? But if you do, you miss the ending.
Yeah, you only need one use of each weapon, but
but you might not know
someone
that
you can't break this
thing,
they're gonna like go out of the way not to use it, right? Like you want to use the funny Durandal you get in chapter 8. So it's a good sword. And if it feels bad to use a weapon, then it does kind of hurt the enjoyment of the game, I think.
Right, like exactly like you said. How would you know? How would you know? One other thing that I also want to talk about. This was the first 2 RNG game, right?
Yes.
That's kind of messy. I feel like this is the first time where a lot of people are noticing that they're hitting or missing more. Is that right? Is that how 2 RNG works, where it basically shoves up hits and misses?
So how it works is basically it biases a bit to the extremes. So if your hit is above 50, your hit is actually a little more accurate than it is displayed. And this gets more extreme the further from 50 you go. If it's lower than 50, the opposite happens, and your actual hit is lower than your displayed hit.
It's interesting you bring this up because most people started with like 2RN games and I've never seen anything else. And you can tell sometimes when people started with 7 or 8 and they go to 6, they'll wonder if the RNG is different because they miss a lot more and they get hit a lot more and they get frustrated. And the reason for that is because hit rates in FE6 in general are different. The weapons are less accurate.
So bad.
Yeah, so bad. The weapons are less accurate, especially iron and steel weapons, which are the ones you're going to use the most. There are some accurate weapons in FE6, but you get them later. And there's more enemies with higher stats, so they'll probably hit you a bit more than you got hit in FE7. FE6 characters are also generally weaker than in FE7. So the numbers are very different, but humans are very bad at, odds and numbers and math when it happens to them like that. And so they get confirmation bias and they wonder if the game is bugged. So FE6 is prone to a lot of rumors about the RNG being bugged or whatever, which it is, but not in the way a lot of people think it is. In FE6, for example, for a time people did think it was 1RN, or there was people who thought it was 1RN when it's just the same RNG as FE7. The seed is the exact same, in fact. And people thought that crit might be rolled before hits, probably because I never saw a crit miss, even though that's just how the game works. For like the record, crit is still rolled after hit. You have to hit and then the game checks if you crit. But I guess because the game has Gonzalez with a 30% crit boost, it's likely to start that rumor. There is a funny thing in FE6 where if you burn like a more billion or random numbers, you can miss a 99 hit, but that's impossible to get without actually doing a tool assisted run of the game. It doesn't happen naturally. But in that way, it is bugged. And they did fix that in FE7. But generally speaking, the RNG is the exact same. And people will just complain about RNG no matter what they're playing. Because when they go from 2RN to 1RN, then the real complaints start. They're like, oh my God, I missed a 90. That never happened to me.
I feel like, who was it? Speedy playing recently? Did he miss some obscene... Or was he got... I don't even remember. It was a couple of weeks ago. I feel like either he got a bad hit or a low chance or high chance miss. It was something, and it is hilarious when it happens. It's just also so unfortunate.
It's a good story.
Oh yeah, it definitely makes for a good story. One other thing I think that this is kind of like the end of, and maybe it's more Sacred Stones than just 6 and 7, is I feel like this is the end of the low stat emblems where we're not as dependent on like really high numbers as we are strategy. And that's not to say, obviously the later games have more mechanics, but I feel like there's a trend in these games where your characters, stats aren't going above 25. Do you feel like it's better like this in this whole crux of lower stat growths, or do you think it's better now where you see people with I think when we had you on the original episode, Mekkah, we talk about people love seeing numbers go up. So you might see like a full flush of every stat going up.
Yeah, and it's something to say for both. I don't think it's necessarily good or bad for a game to have lower or higher numbers as long as the game is balanced and fun, or is has some kind of intended experience, right? It's I think FE7 is a game, one of the easiest games to get the 000 from enemies. Like you're in a bush against the brigands and they have 0 hit, 0 damage, 0 crit on you. So that power creep is still there. It's just presented in a different way. I don't think you can necessarily do it wrong, as long as the game is fun in its own way. I also think that the real power creep, I think, starts in Awakening. So that's still a ways away from here.
Yeah, I
we'll
don't
get
think
there soon.
I don't think big numbers or small numbers. I think both can be fine. I have a personal preference towards smaller numbers, but
Me too.
but I think you can make the games with big numbers. I think are fine.
I know I find it really hard when I pick up a fan hack that, obviously it's going to look like Sacred Stones or 6 or 7, but you notice that like everybody's growth range is from the 80 to 100% or above. And I know that like obviously we're not professional game developers, so there's something there about balancing, but I like this idea of like lower stats make it work. I feel like it challenges you a little bit more. Now, there you could hit a hard wall and a lot could go wrong, but I think to me it makes more sense versus these games where you come in and you just completely slaughter. Like you were talking about Awakening, and we're gonna get there. You have a character like Donald where if you invest in him, I know like he might not be the best Iron Man unit, but I mean like in just a casual play, he is your investment unit because everything is pretty much going to tick up almost every level because is it aptitude? Is that right?
Yeah, there's a lot of characters like that in Awakening. Donald's the most notorious one for sure.
Yeah. Well, and apparently Vake is up there too, right, man?
Yep. Yeah, definitely does that too. In fact, he does it a lot faster.
What's in the name of the game? Awakening.
Yeah, Awakening.
Yeah.
I think I want to end the discussion with this thought, and this one might be a little bit of a spur of the moment, but we have talked about remakes and whatnot, and joking about, are these the two that they're holding on to? But I guess I want to know from you guys, if these were remade, what could be done to them to make them better? Like they're fine games, right? Like you said, one is probably one of the best entry points in the series. The other one, hit for better or worse, like it's still a pretty solid entry. But if they were brought to today's standards, what would you want to see? What would you do?
I would like to improve the support system because it's so slow, and I prefer a system like how you build supports in later games where you just fight together or deploy on the same map. You get support points that way. And the support bonuses would have to be balanced because the ones we have right now are way too powerful. But that's the first thing I can think of. And Fire Emblem right now is already a bit more about supports than it used to be, so I think it would fit to update it like that. There's a lot more things you could change, but that's the first thing that comes to mind for me.
Would you keep it as limited supports, or would you move it to everybody supports everybody?
No, I would definitely keep the limited supports. I think that adds way more character. I would also not add reclassing, for the record. Like maybe split promotions like FE8.
I think the main thing I would want, I mean, I agree they could just make the supports faster would be good. But I also think like just not even a gameplay thing, they could like clean up the story a bit in both. 7, you could clean up the script a bit. 6, for me, I think you could just make 6 a little more interesting. And I would like that. But I don't think the gameplay needs to change too much. I think these games hold up pretty well.
Yeah, one common complaint I see about FE6 is that every map is Cs, and people don't really like that. I don't know why that's such a problem, because the flow of the map is way more important than the way you click the button to finish the map and go to the next. Like the way most people play Fire Emblem is they go around the entire castle, kill all the enemies, get all the chests, and then they click Cs to be done. And does it really matter how you do that? I don't think it really matters. And I also don't think it matters too much that Roy is so underwhelming compared to someone like Ephraim or Hector or Crom or Corrin.
Oh, absolutely.
Like, it's people don't really like escort missions, and I guess keeping Roy alive is a bit of an escort mission, but he's also your game over condition, so it adds challenge to the game, and I think you can perfectly build around it. You just need to go in with the expectation that this character is not going to be super strong, and I mean, you can still have him support other characters. That could be his little niche. You have to be a bit careful. We kind of play him like a dancer. a support character rather than an offensive powerhouse. So I don't think they have to change Roy or the Seas map thing, even though I think that's the main problem a lot of people have with FE6.
I agree that the Seas thing is fine, because then you go to FE7, and I'm like, I would probably like this better if a couple of the defense maps were Seas maps instead, to be honest.
Yeah, I have that in my notes too. Is like FE7 gameplay, fun, varied maps, but a bit too much defense.
I'm wondering if we are kind of like subjects to reviewers where we're told like variety is the spice of life, and if a game doesn't really have these different objectives, then it's not as good, which I'm guilty of. Like personally, I like seeing something that shakes up a map, especially playing a game like Triangle Strategy, where there tends to be that like one extra objective that's thrown in the mix. I like that, but I agree with you, because if you consistently know what you have to do, the way that enemy units are laid out, anything like that is really, reinforcements could make a difference. Like variety doesn't necessarily have to be mission objective. It could just be any other feature that you can do in that context.
Yeah, I think the way you spice up a map is not by changing the main objective, but by adding more side objectives that are worth pursuing, like chests and villages and stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean, you take a map like Chapter 7, doesn't really feel like the other maps in FE6, even though, what you're doing, I guess, ultimately is the same. But playing the map feels different. I think you can make variety while still having a seize point at the end.
Is 7 the first game to have a defend?
No, Thracia did it first
Thracia.
because Kaga. And the thing with the defense map, I think, that makes it a bit more annoying for experienced players is that once you figure out a defense map, there's not too much of a challenge from there forward. Whereas if you're a new player, they can still be very exciting. And like I thought most defense maps I played were exciting as a new player. But as you get experience, they become obligatory things to sit through.
I think it doesn't help that a lot of them are just for a lot of turns. Like, you could probably reduce the amount of time on some of them and it would be fine.
Yeah, I think that depends on like how much pressure is on you, right? Because you can have 7 exciting turns, 10 boring turns, or you can have the numbers reversed.
Well, I'm just thinking like I played Talons of Light the other day. And that map's over like several turns before the map actually ends.
That's if you kill the boss early, I think. If you
kill the boss. Yeah.
If you don't kill him, it's really hectic for me, I think.
I think my thought on if these games were remade is debating if they would do a 7 first, 6 and then second, but still like as one complete package, where you start with Lynn's story and they find a way to like naturally ingrain the two. But I don't know if they could make it work.
I don't trust them to make that work.
Right. It could be really exciting to have like some of the characters that you're seeing pop back in, because technically they're alive, like they make it through, or maybe they don't, and that's a way that they can kind of include that in the story. But I agree with you. I don't trust them to do it, but it could be cool.
It's so hard to faithfully remake a game by itself, let alone integrate the two in a way that is faithful to both. Like, when they made FE7, they weren't even faithful to FE6. Like, how are they going to be faithful to both games by throwing them in one?
They've done worse, Mekkah, okay? They've done worse.
I don't think they should put them together, and I don't think they would, because why charge you for one game when they could, it's 2 games. They imagine they'll want to sell us 2 games. But I wouldn't mind if they added some, in 2 separate games, if they added some references to each other. Like, I don't know, if you wanted to add another FE7 unit in 6, that wouldn't bother me.
Yeah,
I guess
make a transfer
like
system.
If they tried to sell 7 like as a completely new game and they didn't sell 6, I think it'd be disappointing, because like basically the game doesn't start until chapter 10. Like 1 through 10 are just introductory, they're training. So it would be a disappointment if they did it in that way, as just a solo game. I don't think there's enough game there. You would need to pad it, and that's why I'm wondering, like, if they were only going to do 1 but they chose 7, you might as well just do both of them together.
Well, the thing how FE7 works for the Japanese, I believe, is that if they proved that they knew what they were doing, aka they showed they put their complete FE6 save in there or something, and maybe it's just their FE6 cartridge. If they link that up to their FE7 game, then the game will be like, oh, you can skip Limb mode now. You can just start with the proper story, and that way you don't have to do tutorials. So these are possibilities that they can entertain.
Yeah, I would think they would make the tutorial skippable. Or you could do it like Shadow Dragon did it too, where if you play on the lowest difficulty, you get the tutorial. If you play on the harder difficulties, you don't get the tutorial.
Mm-hmm. And like FE7's Chapter 11 for Eliwood mode, for example, is perfectly fine for your normal introduction to Fire Emblem 7. You beat brigands with your sword units. Like, it can still function that way.
Okay, well, apparently Mekkah and Lizard are completely okay with Lin erasure, so feel free to cancel them.
She's still in part 2.
You would be like, who is this wonderful blue-haired swordswoman?
I am a big proponent of Lin in the Binding Blade, okay?
Because you played the one hack where she's like the one thing you threw in there, right?
Yes, that's the only thing I changed.
Guys, I obviously want to thank you so much again for being here. Lizard, it was weird not having you on when the Speedy Bopper, but you said Fates is not your jam, so...
I mean, I've played it, but I'm much less knowledgeable on Fates than probably every other game in the series.
Well, that episode posts tomorrow, so you will get to see how much fun that was. And then Mekkah, of course, as always, good having you here. I can't wait to have you for. I think we still have you due for Awakening and for Shadows of Valentia.
Nice, looking forward to it. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, of course. And at some point, linking is going to be here too, so put that on your calendar. But as usual, I want to thank you all for listening. Make sure that you follow ActualLizard. I know you've been doing some really great streams lately on Sacred Stones, and you just finished your Three Houses one, right?
Yeah, Three Houses is done. So now I'm doing Thracia ROM hack, Echoes, and FE8 Iron Man.
And then Mekkah, what have you been doing post Awakening? Because that was the last thing I saw from you.
Yeah, I've been streaming a roguelike version of Fire Emblem.
That's right.
Which I think I just did the last stream on, but that's what I said last time, and I'm a little addicted. I'm going to continue doing other ROM hacking projects at some point. I'm still wrapping up my Pokemon Black and White Soul Lock with Bizmix. I'm wrapping up Sacred Stones Lunatic mode, and I'm getting through Fire Emblem Genealogy. So, like, a ton of different projects going on.
Yeah, a lot of things. Well, make sure you give these two a follow, and then I want to thank you all for listening. Now go out there and get gaming.